You know, when it comes down to it, there could be more than one kind of heretic. And in today's episode, our guests admitted to straying from accepted and normalized screenwriting format on at least one occasion. And I was too absolutely horrified to see if they did it more than once. Howdy, I'm Jeff Goldsmith, and this is the Q&A. My agenda is simple. Each week, I plan to bring you in-depth insights into the creative process of storytelling. And folks, I ain't lying to you, because that would be a sin. And today's guests, Scott Beck and Bryan Woods, well, they have fully admitted to going away from normal screenwriting format, and they told us all about it and where they did it. And damn it, I want to see the pages because it sounds cool and it makes sense. And you know what? It's okay to experiment with format. Format is just a guideline. It doesn't mean you're a heretic. I'm just saying, internet, calm down sometimes. But look, I absolutely love their film where the true horror of it all is religion itself. And I was very happy to have co-writers and co-directors Scott Beck and Bryan Woods with us for the Q&A today. And you know, they've been working on Heretic a long time, and their patience really paid off because, man, you just don't see horror films with long monologues like this, or even lectures, you could call them at a certain point. And I was all there for it. Everybody gave an amazing performance, including and especially Hugh Grant. This film is just a pleasure to watch. And I was lucky enough to see it at the AFI Fest premiere this year and then attend the after party. And it was really just kind of interesting listening in on all the conversations as people left the theater and different meanings of the ending, which, you know, is kind of open-ended on purpose. It's a really smart, well-written horror film that gets people talking, and without a doubt, Beck and Woods were very forthcoming about their creative process, so I know you'll dig this episode. And speaking of things to dig, I hope you also check out Backstory Magazine. We turned 12 this year, and we couldn't have done it without your help. You could read us on a desktop or laptop at backstory.net. You could also read us on our iPad app, Backstory. And folks, if you've never read us before, you could even test drive us and see our free issue. And folks, we're getting into the award season here, so we're going to have a lot of interesting articles continue to pop up in Backstory Magazine. You know, we're a digital magazine, so we update our table of contents with new articles all the time. We also put free excerpts on our blog as well. So I hope you keep checking out our site to see what we're up to. And if you've never read us before, you could read our entire free issue at backstory.net or via our app. And if you like what you see, and I hope that you do, I hope you'll consider joining us and supporting independent entertainment journalism. It would really mean a lot to me to have my listeners in Apple Podcasts and Spotify and my watchers of the Backstory Magazine YouTube page, which is where all these Zoomcasts go. That's right, you could see us actually talking on our Zoom. It would really mean a lot to me to have you support my passion project, so thanks for considering becoming a subscriber. And remember, as we get into the holiday season, you could give the gift of Backstory to that storyteller who is special in your life. And you could even use discount coupon code SAVE5 to save $5 off a one-year subscription. But now, without any further ado, let's jump right into our interview with co-writers and co-directors Scott Beck and Bryan Woods about their latest film, Heretic, in theaters now. So don't forget to support great horror writing. Scott, Bryan, it's good to see you guys. How you doing?
Doing well.
Good
How
to
are
see
you?
Good. I had the pleasure of seeing this film at its premiere at the AFI Fest at the Chinese Theater, which was just awesome. I saw it with a completely packed house, and nobody knew what to expect. And I absolutely love this film. So we're going to dive into it in a spoiler-free fashion for the moment. I know this is a hard one, spoiler-free, because there's some details here, but when did you get the first kernel of this idea? I know it was allegedly before Quiet Place.
Well, so Scott and I have known each other since we were 11 years old. We've been writing movies ever since then. And ever since then, we've probably been, debating religion and questioning our beliefs. We both grew up kind of Christian, not like, would you say you were intensely devout, or would you?
I would say it was like, it was Presbyterian, but it was not like our Catholic friends where it felt like it was so regimented. There was a little more flexibility.
But we kind of went to church, and then as we got older and older, our beliefs, our worldview expanded. We met friends that were atheists and friends that were in other religions that were not Christian. And especially the older that we got and you move to Los Angeles and you get married and then you marry into different religions, all of this stuff has always been interesting to us and we've always been questioning it. And then coupled with that was this dream that we've had our whole artistic kind of careers of like, wow, one day it'd be so fun to do a movie in the, I don't know what to call it, the subgenre of religious discourse. Like I would put, Zemeckis' Contact in that bucket. I would put Stanley Kramer's Inherit the Wind in that bucket. Movies that are kind of talking about religion and it's a conversation. And we always thought like, oh, it'd be so cool to do that. But we don't know anything about religion personally. And we don't even know where we're on our journey. But that was just a dream. It was like a bucket list, like one day, maybe. And then about 10 years ago, we started writing this movie, Heretic, about two Mormon missionaries who knock on the wrong door. And we got about 15 pages into the script where the sister missionaries sit down with Mr. Reed, who is played by Hugh Grant in the film. And we realize as writers, he has a genius level IQ. He knows everything about every religion. And we just didn't have the knowledge. And so we kind of had to put the script down and go off and write a few other things while we were filling our heads with some religious history that we were sorely lacking. That's what it's been. It's been a kind of a dream project of trying to express and talk about this difficult subject matter that as two kids growing up in Iowa, you really weren't allowed to talk about. You're kind of discouraged, like do not bring up religion at the dinner table is what we'd always hear. So
it's interesting because what you're also talking about is the concept of research. And when it comes to saying, oh, I'm not prepared to do a religious horror film until I have my grasp on everything, that could be a lifetime worth of study. At what point did you know when you had what you needed fundamentally and you were ready to start really digging back in? Like, how long was your research period?
It was a period of 10 years, but it wasn't a moment of, we've done it. We've figured religion out. We've cracked the code. We have all the research. It's like, obviously, of course, it's a subject matter that you can never stop learning. It was a confluence of events that made us dive in head first. It was basically, we were at professionally, personally, whatever. We were just kind of at a dark kind of low point in our lives for various reasons that nobody needs to hear about. But we've all had those moments where things are just not feeling well and you're kind of struggling to find that happiness. And then on top of that, at that moment, at that kind of low point, father unexpectedly passed away from cancer.
I'm sorry to hear that.
So we were just at a very raw emotional place. And we kind of were just like, all right, motherfucker, like now's the time. Like if we had to ask ourselves, like, if you're going to write this thing that's about death and your anxiety about what happens when you die and your fear of religion either being true or not true, now is the time. We were just feeling those kind of emotions. And that's why we decided to write it.
The casting of Sophie Thatcher and Chloe East was perfect. I mean, they were this is a three-hander. Like it's really them and Hugh Grant, and that's the movie. And by the way, that's fantastic. But what's fascinating to me is that they play Mormon missionaries, and they've both formerly been Mormon. One of them has said that she left the church, permanently, while her family still might be in it, and the other said that she's just non-practicing.
Yeah.
What did they think about your script when they got it and taking on a role like this?
I know from like Chloe, she talks about like the before and after of getting the script. And I think the before reaction was a bit of fear that it would feel exploitational, that it would paint Mormonism as it has been in other sects of the media, meaning like, oh, it paints Mormons as like sheltered and naive and not as like world weary as others. But then she described her reaction to the script afterwards of like, oh, this actually has a lot of heart. It feels very fair. The casting for both Sophie and Chloe, in terms of knowing their relationship about the Mormon Church, was something that was unbeknownst to us throughout the long process of looking at so many different incredible actors for the roles of Paxton Barnes. Carmen Cuba, our casting director, kept bringing Chloe and Sophie back to the forefront. We kept watching them. They felt like they were so genuine about their embodiment of being sister missionaries. And it wasn't until like in the 11th hour when we were pretty much like zeroing in on both of them that we discovered their history. And of course, Carmen knew that all along. But for us, it was a bit of a revelation because we felt, one, that's why they're so genuine, because they're still tapped into former friends or relationships that they had with the church still, but that they also had an access point that anytime we're on set, if we had a question of authenticity, they'd be able to embody that better than you know, somebody else that might just be doing their research. So that felt like a little bit of a lifeboat that we had.
It reminded us a lot of A Quiet Place, where, you know, Millicent Simmons, who is, you know, playing Reagan, who is deaf, and that personal experience expands the material. Like we kind of always said, Millie was in some ways like, you know, the fourth writer on A Quiet Place, because just that lived personal experience and that truth that she knows makes everything more real, more true. And certainly felt that with Sophie and Chloe throughout the process. They were constantly telling us, you know, little things of like, oh, I think, like, you know, when we separate, like, there's the sight and sound dynamic between missionaries, they never separate. So like, I got to play that on, you know, my expression as she leaves, and like, oh, that's so, you know, like those really cool true life things that help flesh it out.
Basic question just about your creative habit. How important is outlining to your process?
There's a degree of like knowing the loose parameters of what the story needs, meaning like the setup is obviously super important. Getting our feet underneath the characters and getting their voices fermented is very important, and knowing where we need to end up. But there's a bit of fuzziness like in between those, and so much of the process usually is like writing like 10 to 15 pages, and then we're both reacting to it. And so if like Brian takes a swing at like a section, then he sends it to me, and now I'm reading it somewhat as the first audience member, like knowing where we loosely talked about going, but then having moments of surprise, and then reacting to that, revising it, maybe going a little further and tossing it back and forth. That's usually how our process goes. So it leaves room for discovery in the middle of the movie sometimes.
Yeah, we think of like this outline is like, it's this out of focus object. It's the first act is a little sharper, it's a little clearer what that is, and then act 2 is fuzzier, and then act 3 is very fuzzy. It's this like kind of this broad stroke. We know it's driving towards this thematic idea or this revelation. We know it's going to end in this way, but how we get there or why or what is it, you know, those are all things we're answering. And that for us keeps the writing process fun. And there's a lot of discovery that happens. And more than that, I think like it allows us to not be precious with the parameters that we've set up, so we can just burn, you know, like, oh, we thought this is what we were writing a movie about. Actually, we're writing a movie about this. We had no idea. Let's the characters be alive. You want that, especially with Mr. Reed. He's such an interesting character to write. You know, this is a character that's smarter than us, that knows more than we do. And it was like, you write the character, he comes alive. He starts talking. He starts saying things that like we don't. It's spiritual in a way. It's like supernatural. You know, he would take over the script and make choices that we weren't expecting, and that's really fun as a writer to follow those crazy instincts.
Well, let's talk about Mr. Reed for a second. I mean, one of my all-time favorite films is The Wicker Man, and you know, it's a great horror film that fits perfectly into the concept of religious horror, where horror in this case is really the beast of religion coming at it from two men of faith, basically, who have diametrically opposed views. And in that movie, Christopher Lee, he is just eating the scenery up, like in the most beautiful way. And it is perfect. And hey, kids out there, I'm sorry to say, do not watch the Nicolas Cage version of Wicker Man. If you've ever seen it, stick with the original. And what you basically did with Mr. Reed is you almost posited the question of, what if the Lord of Summer Isle had a whole movie? You know, like that kind of great, pompous, but very, very smart and targeted character is able to chew all the scenery. And I mean that as a compliment, by the way. Hugh Grant's performance was incredible, and I just love The Wicker Man. And it's funny that the guys who wrote Quiet Place and also 65, which doesn't have a lot of dialogue in it either, like are turning in some of the best dialogue of the year. What changed for you in writing the dialogue here? I know it was over the course of many years, and we'll talk about this more with specific examples in the spoiler section, but the biggest hat trick you did is you have great dialogue. You also have lecturing and monologues, and not just one. And you don't get that in films a lot, but you did it visually, you did it like in a really smart way that nobody wants to look away. Like that is the set piece of the film. And there's you know, 2 or 3 of them we could name. So what were your rules of dialogue? Because you just don't find, especially monologues, finding the time in a modern horror movie.
We had a trilogy in mind of modern day silent films. It was going to be A Quiet Place, 65, and then one more movie. And then after 65, we were like, I think people are enough with the dialogue gimmick. I think people were like maybe a little tired of that. I don't know. We had a lot of dialogue building up.
Yeah, one day we'll find a good balance between no dialogue and dialogue. But I think it's like we were interested in weaponizing ideas and making those scary and making dialogue scary to challenge one's beliefs through the vessel of like this movie with the two sister missionaries. The idea of dismantling what you take for granted is really scary. And I think we were inspired to a certain degree by certain cults, and Keith Raniere with the Nexium cult comes to mind as this guy who's not, he doesn't have like insane charisma, but at the same time, like he feels kind of relatable, and he has this word salad that he mixes together to sound like he's actually really intelligent, and he's captivated a whole group of people to follow his belief systems. And yet it felt like maybe we can find a way that parallels with religion, and the way that whether it's somebody preaching on a Sunday sermon or somebody on a street corner that seems like they're crazy, find an intersection of all those interests that we've had. And it kind of becomes inevitable that it has to be through the course of dialogue to try and do something slightly different in terms of like the religious horror genre.
You know, something else we had talked about a little bit was this idea that, you know, on the stage in theater, there's really not, the horror genre is not very well represented in theater. So, you know, The Woman in Black is maybe an example, but there are almost no examples. And in cinema, the horror genre couldn't be more popular. And we were kind of dissecting like, why, what is that? And we kind of came to this idea of, well, in cinema, there are so many tricks and tools in the filmmaker toolbox that lend itself to the genre, that you can generate tension and scares through, you know, cinematography and shadows and in suggestion and sound design. There's all these tools in your filmmaking toolbox that make horror a wonderful genre. And so then we started asking ourselves, okay, are we so excited and drawn to those tools of the genre? Are we actually neglecting something that's more powerful? Are we neglecting the dialogue? Are we neglecting a potent, like the terror of a potent philosophical or religious idea? Could that actually be more terrifying than the creature that's lurking in the shadows? And certainly, you know, could it be more terrifying than jump scares, which to us have started to become white noise a little bit as movie watchers, because they've gotten so good, and the filmmakers who are really good at a good jump scare they're so talented, but it's like they were just inundated with them. And so
it's also a crutch. I mean, I'm sorry.
And to be honest, it's a crutch.
It's really become a crutch.
It has become a crutch, and we're guilty of that, right? Like we've written movies where we're almost like, we got to the point where we're like, all right, and then then this thing happens, and it's like, well, we've done that so many times, and you kind of know how to do it, and so this felt scary. I don't mean in terms of like the audio. I mean like scary to us as writers. Like, can we use dialogue and words as weapons and scares? That was thrilling to us, and so the kind of broad concept was one of the reasons we were drawn to this material.
Interestingly, this could be a play. I mean, it's a three-hander with a couple of sets. Like, I think most of what you do would work as a play.
We worked our asses off as filmmakers to make it feel cinematic and large in scope, and I hope that it does feel that way. But you're absolutely right in the contained nature of it. And a lot of our references, like we're watching, Dial M for Murder, we're watching Death in the Maiden, we're watching Oleana Mammoth's Piece. Like we are, no question, we're Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. We're looking at chamber pieces when we're putting this film together and trying to understand how the masters pulled it off, because it's just tricky.
I thought you totally succeeded with your usage of camera. Like, the creepiness is what he's delivering the whole time, and the fact that he's, essentially presenting himself as not a good guy. That's very clear, very fast to anybody watching. And even if you're agreeing with something that he's talking about philosophically, he's not. His intent is not.
Sure, yeah.
Is not in the right place. And so it's fascinating, because you did manage to really get a lot of targeted shots with close-ups Hitchcockian style almost, just from them locking their bikes up when they arrive at his house, pulling back, and how you come back to that later. And, something as simple as matches on a carpet, matches just straight out of the box on a carpet. Like, there was a lot of great cinematic moments. Were those heavily storyboarded? Was there a storyboarding period for you?
Specifically, like those sections that you're mentioning, yes, went heavy on storyboarding and the Hitchcock influence, thinking about like strangers on a train when Bruno has to grab like a lighter to implicate the other guy. So like moments like that, we certainly were like pulling from the playbook of our heroes of like Hitchcock, even M. Night Shyamalan, who like specifically motivates the camera. But the one thing that we wanted to make sure of is that there also conversely was a freedom for the actors, that we weren't inhibiting a performance because we were so dogmatic about the camera has to be here. And so many of the conversations that we had with our DP, Chung Hoon Chung, who we admired from his work in Old Boy or Stoker, Last Night in Soho, so many beautiful contained pieces often, was about finding what our rhythm could be, that we're doing something cinematic, but it's evolving and it feels like it's also catering towards performances. So two things that we did. The first was Chung Hoon came to us and was like, what if we start off very boring? And we kind of leaned in. We were like, what do you mean? And he's like, that we don't move the camera much really at first. And so we start off the movie and outside of like pulling back from this mountainscape, like it feels very static at first. And you're just honing in on who these characters are. And that's all the concentration really is from a camera standpoint. But as the movie goes on, that language starts to evolve. There's those moments that are storyboarded, but then there's these longer dialogue driven scenes that we were very self-conscious about not wanting to feel boring or feel like we're just shooting it like an episodic TV production. And so each room, from a technical standpoint, we outfitted with dance floor so that the camera could actually roll and move on the ground. And we would shoot these scenes in like 10 to 15 minute long takes just to let all the dialogue and the character interactions feel as organic and real as possible without interrupting it. Chung Hoon and us would be communicating on like an intercom system, and he has incredible instincts. So we'd start seeing something in Hugh Grant's performance and start zeroing in. And then we'd be like, oh, wait, but Chloe and Sophie are doing something interesting. So let's make sure that we're panning around. And we'd cover like a certain section, like through 4 or 5 different takes. And we'd be honing in on new things that we find really, really interesting, so that it became this combination of like letting the performance lead, but then finding where the cinema starts to really creep in and make sure that we have an impactful moment on a certain line and that the camera lands a certain way, which was a brand new way for us to work, but one that ultimately was really fun and exciting and new for us.
I would ask, just going back to what you were saying, what do you mean by a dance floor? Like, explain what you mean a little more about that.
It's making sure that the floor is as flat as possible. Like, so we love dolly moves. Just to be clear, the kind of visual aesthetic that we were going for in this film was control. Like, we like the thematic extension of Reed's idea of religion being about control. We wanted the camera to feel like it had control. So we wanted very intentional, specific dolly shots. But what we didn't want is dolly track everywhere on the ground where actors are tripping over it and being aware, like, oh, when I cross through here, I have to step over the thing. And so we designed the sets to be as flat as possible so that we can cart, a dolly around. So it still has that feeling. We didn't want this like kind of floaty steady cam feeling. I feel like that's usually the go-to piece of technical equipment to achieve what we were wanting to achieve. But it feels different. It doesn't feel controlled. It feels floaty. It feels spontaneous. It feels random. We didn't want the movie to feel random at all in terms of the story.
How many cameras were you shooting with?
Usually one camera, which meant like, doing a big scene, like the middle of the movie, there's this scene with like iterations of Monopoly, which was like 35 pages. And so it meant really going back.
Yeah, I was going to ask how many pages that was, because it is a showstopper, and it's like only you guys could have a set piece with board games, which we will get to in the section for sure. But yes. That's wild that it was 35 pages. But I mean, even the filming of that scene, but other scenes, there are times when Hugh Grant is like owning it with his monologue, but you were actually not on him. You were circling behind the girls' heads to kind of, I don't know, give the audience a POV in a sense of not looking at him, but kind of inner reflection on their own. Because again, you were behind their heads. You weren't even on their faces. sometimes when you were circling, which I thought was a bold move when you have one of your performing a major monologue, which was cool. You know, I guess when you guys sit down to write for your daily writing habits, do you give yourself a set amount of pages to hit each day or a set amount of hours that you want to write? And also, I know most boring question ever, but do you write together or alone?
Well, we write alone, and the reason why we tried writing together when we were younger, and that just turns into screwing around and laughing, and also like there's a self-consciousness at play. I think when you're in the room with somebody, you're kind of aware of what you're writing, and our feeling is that when you write, you want to be embarrassingly personal. You want to like embarrass yourself, and you want to say things that you can't believe you're saying. And you want to be going places into the story that you would be mortified if anyone knew you were going there. That to us is sometimes our favorite writers, we think, kind of go into those dangerous waters. And so writing with somebody next to you, or even writing in a public place, like a Starbucks or something, is risky because you're at risk of self-censorship and not being raw, is our feeling. So we write alone. I think we do. When we're in a groove, you want to put in the hours. And I think we're pretty responsible and rigorous. And then the fact that there's two of us, like, we'll shame each other into like, oh, really? You're taking the day off because I'm, over here writing, putting in 10 hours. So we kind of encourage each other through competition sometimes to put the time in, but the time is necessary. But having said that, like, if you're not having a good day or it's not coming, like, then don't write.
Yeah.
I don't want to force it either.
And there's like a trick that I always try to employ where if I like, usually it's really hard at first to like get into it, and then you start finding your groove. But then once you find your groove, if there's a little bit of energy that you have left, like, save it, because then you can bankroll that and use it like the next day, where it's like, oh, I was really excited to write this scene, but I'm going to save a little bit of that. So then I'll go into the next one. You pick up more momentum occasionally. You
want to show up excited.
Yeah.
If you show up excited to write, like, oh, I can't wait to write that thing's going to be so fun, then you're more likely to show up.
Yeah.
If you end where you're frustrated and hating life, which is obviously for most writers, ourselves included, it happens all the time, then it's harder to pick up the work the next day.
I feel like maybe we've abandoned in our early years, maybe like 2 scripts. And I think those were, in part, I could attribute to like the energy just kind of running out. And
the energy is more likely to run out the more time that passes, I think, with you. So
I also would add, I think the energy runs out because the idea loses its allure, which always happens at some point in the process. But like everything that we've written and have been able to get produced, those are ideas that have been in our heads for like 10 to 15 years. And so we know that if we keep coming back to those mentally, that there's enough to kind of like scrape out of the characters and what the story really needs to be. And there's something personally anchoring us.
And what's funny about that, as you say that, because it's true, like A Quiet Place, 65, Heretic, they were all kind of big hooky ideas that we had for years and years. But what's funny is it doesn't stop us from having the same paranoia every time that somebody's going to write that idea before we do.
Yeah.
It's like, so like we have all this anxiety, like, oh no, like if we don't hurry up, somebody's gonna have this idea about monsters that react to sound, like, but yet we still take our sweet ass time getting there.
We do. Yeah.
And I guess we've been lucky that those ideas haven't quite been stepped on.
I can't decide if it matters. Do you know what I mean? Like that's a very common fear that a lot of writers have.
I know.
Talking about.
It's a good question.
There's even a genre mashup of something that I've been working on for many years that has religious stuff in it, and I've done a lot of the research, and I loved seeing some of the research that I did that I'm not using at all in your movie.
Yeah.
Like I thought it was brilliant. Like and so it again actually said to me, like, no, nobody's going to ever get your unique perspective.
It's so true.
That's true.
It's not possible. Like only unless they're trying on purpose. Like when, the 2 Alexander Great movies came out within a year of each other or something like that. When studios are just having a pissing contest. Like,
there's this thing we always remind ourselves anytime we get paranoid, right, about exactly what you're talking about. We remind ourselves that M. Night Shyamalan once said that he almost stopped writing The Sixth Sense when he saw the trade announcement that they were making Casper, the movie.
Yeah.
Because it's so perfectly illuminates the paranoia that all screenwriters have when you have a cool idea that you're excited about. And Jeff, I think you're exactly right that it's your personal take on the material or the concept that is makes it interesting and what makes it you. And there's no way to replicate that. That is a snowflake. It is its own thing.
I'll get into it a little more in once we're in the spoiler section, but like your research was impeccable. So I mean, like, kudos to you on that. And I want to get there. What was your budget and schedule really quick? Just like the basics to get out of the way.
We had 30 days. We put all of our budget, it's always an awkward thing. I don't know if we're supposed to talk about it, but it was like, under 12. All of our money went into days. Do you know what I'm saying? And it went into our set. We built the set. We had to build the set, 2 stories so that like you could actually go up and down the stairs. We didn't want it floor 1 over here and floor 2.
I mean, like, all of your money ended up on the screen. It's incredible that you were able to do that for 12 or under, even though you're in Canada and clearly getting tax credits and stuff like that too. One other, just very briefly, these strikes were going on, if I have my timeline right, you were shooting right as the WGA strike was about to end. And so I know you got a SAG waiver. Did you also have to get a WGA waiver? And how did that work?
We were at like this crazy spot in the industry, right? Like where we had our script, basically our shooting script had to be locked in order for us to like move ahead. And on one hand, like that was terrifying because it's like, once we get to set, like as WGA members that are fighting for everything that the union's standing for, we have to acknowledge, like, as directors, we can't be changing the script. But at the same time, like if there was a script that we had a confidence in, it was the structure of this, because it was so much about this religious conversation. And we already had Hugh Grant on board. I think at that point, we also had Chloe and Sophie. And so we already started having conversations about what the movie is. And so we all knew, like, we feel like we can move forward with this script. We were shooting up in Vancouver, where we were still able to forge ahead with the production. And the added bonus was like A24 was like one of the quote unquote good studios, like the one that like understood, and they were not on the strike list. And so we were lucky because there was another version of this movie that we had other buyers and studios interested in this, but they would have been on the strike list. We were looking at other locations that were in the United States, like that would have prohibited us from making the movie. And so we were, on one hand, like very fortunate, and we were benefactors also of a production slowdown. We're up in Vancouver, like we had an insanely talented crew. We had Christopher Nolan's dolly grip, and there was an excitement for a lot of the crew just to be able to be working, and that passion we felt on set every single day, that they were really invested in the movie, to the point where, because we were shooting these long extended takes where Hugh is doing these like 10-minute scenes with Chloe and Sophie, we get to the end of the take and the crew would actually applaud because they felt like they saw somebody like exert themselves to the nth degree to do this scene, but not just like say the words, but perform the words as if it felt like incredible stage play on Broadway.
Actually, but just to answer the question again, did the WGA like give you like a signed document or like a waiver, or did you not even need one because A24 wasn't on the strike list?
Legally, we were covered. I don't remember the ins and outs, but I know like we went like much production counsel to like make sure.
And I'm sorry if I'm getting this wrong, because it's, we made this movie so long ago, but I vaguely want to say everything was resolved before we even started shooting with the writer's strike.
I mean, I would assume so.
Yes, I'm pretty sure it was like a week before we started shooting.
Being like, well, now you can change the script, and we were like, well, we don't want to.
So that's right.
Still good.
Yeah.
Good to go.
And you wouldn't have had many changes because there's not going to be like a lot of religious improv going on here. Like,
right, exactly.
You've done your research. But I guess another question is, did you have rehearsal? Because you're talking about these really long takes. How long was your rehearsal?
We had a week of rehearsals, which wasn't enough. And we had this so we rehearsed the opening living room scene with Hugh and Sophie and Chloe, and we were like, everyone was feeling very confident. Wow, like, oh man, we're doing something interesting. Like, this is exciting. Like, everyone's, the actors really liked each other and respected each other, and we're feeling really good. And then we go into that crazy library scene that we've been talking about, where a huge chunk of the movie takes place. And we put the scene up on its feet, and he was like, do you guys want to like do a read through? And we're like, we hate read throughs. It's always like it just like, it always makes us feel bad as filmmakers or writers. Like, we just don't like that process. Yeah. So we were like, stupidly, let's just put it up on its feet. Let's put it up on its feet. We get into the library scene and everyone starts performing, and the whole scene just falls apart. It's just like, it's a disaster. The blocking's clunky. The actors are frustrated with the material. The lines aren't coming out. The jokes aren't landing. The whole thing's a disaster. And we're sweating, and we're looking at Hugh, and we're all having the same realization. We're going, oh no, like, this is not only is this a disaster, but we should have been rehearsing this movie for a month or 2 months. Like we should have treated this like theater. Like we're literally saying that to each other. Like what were we thinking? Like we should have treated this like theater. Like we should have done, and we're very depressed. We go home that night and we're like, oh, what a disaster. And then we show up on stage the next day, and Hugh, being the kind of, professional who's seen it all and been there, done that a million times, was like, maybe we should just like, and he was in the most respectful, sweetest way possible. Yeah. I know you guys don't really like read throughs, but like, I wonder if we should just like maybe we should just read the scene and not really act, or just say the words. And we're like, of course, you like whatever you think. Cause whatever we did yesterday was what not to do. And then just by reading the material, everyone could kind of get situated. We go, okay, the material works. Like it's not that. It's just that we have to break this scene down. We're shooting a movie. We wish we had a month to rehearse it. We don't have that. So now we're in hazard mode, and we just realized like we just have to break this down piece by piece by piece. This entire scene is going to be three pages here, 3 pages there. And that's how we did it, little by little. And really appreciated Hugh's kind of, wisdom in that moment. We really needed somebody who's made a million movies and kind of knew how to like tackle the material, because we were all having a panic attack until that point.
I think it's a good practice. I mean, I know that there's people that are vehemently against it, but like from anything I've ever seen, that once actors really get so used to the words that they're secondary, that's when they inhabit their characters, when they're not thinking about what their next line is. An early read through and any rehearsal, I've always thought is a good thing, because it's kind of the theatrical method. But I know that there's a lot of filmmakers who have successfully avoided doing that without problem. But I don't know. I think if you were to really graph it out, a little rehearsal, just it doesn't.
Oh, totally. And
hurt any department, like literally no department suffers.
We love rehearsal. Like rehearsal's a wonderful thing. Working with a great actor like Adam Driver, who is very spontaneous in the moment and brings a lot when the cameras are rolling. But even he loves rehearsal, like loves being able to kind of map out what's about to happen and get the blocking settled, so we all know what we're doing. And it's one of those things where it's always a wonderful thing.
So you guys were working on this for years, and I've just got to know, what was the worst note you ever got from a producer? Because this is not an easy movie to say, oh yeah, like it's got lectures on religion, let's go finance this immediately. Like, so what was the worst note or the worst suggestion you ever heard from somebody that was interested but freaking didn't get it at all?
Yeah, well, because when we wrote the script, we definitely thought nobody in their right mind would ever want to make this movie.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of have like a vague answer, meaning like they put it in the vaguest terms, but basically there were financiers that were interested in making this movie, but they wanted to strip as much of the religious discourse out of the movie. And they were more interested in like, oh, it's about 2 missionaries that arrive at a house and they get trapped. And that's where it would begin and end. But then you get the pleasure of having interest from a place like A24, which doesn't look at the script and have really any notes of that degree. They're like, this might divide people. Great. Like, let's do something that's like trying to provoke people or trying to like challenge them or make them be more introspective. And that's where the excitement really, really started about getting this movie made as soon as they raised their hand.
That's fantastic. Yes, take out the religion, and then we'll go finance your movie. It totally makes sense. Okay, so look, kids out there listening to this podcast, we're going to get into the spoilers right now. So to my podcast listeners and Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and the YouTube watchers of the Backstory Magazine YouTube page, which is where all these Zoomcasts go. Yes, you could actually see us talking on your screen in little boxes. If you have not yet seen Heretic, it's in theaters. Go see it. Support good horror writing in theaters at the box office. Let studios know you want to see more movies like this. Whatever you do, it doesn't matter. We are getting into the spoilers now, so you have been forewarned. I am going to jump right into it. The amount of research that you did in this concept of deconstructing religions, which is the character goal of Mr. Reed, comparative religion, essentially. It is a very lofty element to try and pursue in any sort of a film. And there could have been a lot of ways to visually achieve it. But your showstopper of when you let the audience know that you're doing something different than really anyone's done before was your Monopoly monologue, in which you explain the lineage or the iterations, importantly, of the board game Monopoly, starting with the 1904 game Landlord, which was then ripped off to become Monopoly. And then you go further, even showing the different iterations of Monopoly. And by the way, there might need to be a Kickstarter campaign for a Heretic version of Monopoly. just throwing that one out there.
Yes.
Tell us how you came up with that, because what you essentially did is you diluted, in a good way, all the heavy research that you did into very simple, understandable icons like Monopoly, something that everyone knows, and you made it easily digestible to show how iterations of things change, which is the first of two examples you used in the movie. So tell us about the evolution of this monologue, because, by the way, it could have been boring, and I want to hear the different iterations and when you even found out about the landlord to Monopoly iterations.
It's a reaction to our own taste, meaning we're not the guys to always like talk about religion or any heady topic for hours on end, only from an intellectual standpoint. Like there's going to be discourses on, like there is in the movie, on fast food or board games. Like I feel like we're always trying to find like a metaphorical way in to speak to ourselves first and foremost as audience members. And I felt like that was one of the anchors of the scene.
Yeah. And it was a scene that was very hard to write. It took a long time. It started very fuzzy. You've heard us say this a few times today, just how out of focus our ideas are from the 20,000 foot view. We're like, okay, we know we want him to make a comparison. We know we want the comparison to have a relationship to gamesmanship, board games, chess. Like we looked into the history of chess. Like we started researching other things because we felt like Reed has a game. He's performing a game. Like he's putting on a game tonight for it. So like we like that relationship, but we didn't, we had to find the right connection. Same with the music. We knew the music was going to tie into this, but what is the song? And researched a lot of different rights issues and copies and iterations, stolen work. And it's just all these vague kind of abstract ideas swirling around and trying to make sense of it and putting it in Reed's mouth and having him speak it. And it's been challenging for us to articulate writing that sequence. It was a sequence we were very proud of and very depressed when we wrote it, because we were like, well, we're not going to get the rights to Monopoly and we're not going to get the rights to Radiohead. They're not going to want us to air their dirty laundry. And it just felt like a thing where it was fun to write and we were proud of it on the page, but it would never really get off the page. Was kind of our...
Well, wait a minute, just to decode it. We'll get to the song stuff in a minute, but just focusing on Monopoly for a second.
Yeah.
If it comes down to it, you could have talked about Landlord as the original board game and then Monopoly in a documentary style without getting the rights. But to do it as great as you did it, you did need the rights. And you didn't stop at just like the comparison of Landlord to Monopoly. Your final stab at these girls was punching through that even Monopoly rips itself off with different iterations, including the more folksy localized version, which he says, like Mormonism, and he sets down a Bob Ross Monopoly to show like a kind of sillier version. I'm just curious, like, did you when you got to that realization of the usage of iterations, was that a point when you realized, okay, we're now cooking with something in which we've just visually been able to explain to the audience Mr. Reed's point of view, which is that there is no one true religion, but everyone that quote unquote plays the game thinks that they are participating in the one true religion. It's like a very key moment in your writing process, that monologue.
It was a really special moment. I mean, even like Bob Ross, like putting that in, which we have conflicted feelings about because of his history being ripped off by the estate. And yet at the same time, we liked that meta commentary that's going on because Reed's making a point about this kind of capitalistic takeover of religion as well. And I don't know, we were just doing our damnedest to make sure everything had a connection. I think that's what you do. There's a schizophrenic quality of being a screenwriter, where you move through life and you make connections in your brain. You're always making connections and you're always at risk of losing your fucking mind, frankly, because you draw these connections. That's what screenwriting is.
I mean, I feel like the connections come alive on the page too, like during the writing process, like us talking about how Monopoly originated from the Landlord's Game and Elizabeth Maggie and this feminist that all of a sudden her history with that board game starts getting erased, and then start realizing like, oh, actually that says something specifically about religious history and the way that there's very overt misogyny that you can see throughout the eons of religion, starting from like Eve coming from Adam's rib and the popes being men and everything feeling male dominated. And so I think we try to keep our antennas open as much as possible, both in life, but also like in making the movie, to feel like there's a cohesive nature about everything that's being put in there. So there's an intentionality. And occasionally the beautiful thing about it is sometimes there's even more that you can read out of it that's so subconscious to us, but there's deeper layers that exist in the creation of these things.
Briefly, tell me the chess version. I love chess. Like, I never get to play it because not enough of my friends know how. And I get bored with kind of the online games sometimes because people are just using a computer to help them with their game. Right. What would the chess version have been?
I would have to open up our reams.
Okay. That's
but we looked at all kinds of ancient forms of games and the evolution of those games. Mathematics. I think there was a relationship between mathematics and chess that was interesting, but not as fun. That's fun. Cultural kind of like, the pop culture iconography really grabs you. And when we wrote the Monopoly scene, like we're using images, like our style oftentimes we're kind of pictorial of placing moments in the script. And so Heretic was one of those where like we're showing you the board game covers with images in like the holy books and
so you put that in the script?
Yeah.
Exactly. Did you Photoshop
it? And you see it kind of evolve, like you see, because he's telling a story and it's over the course of several minutes and several pages. He's like building a case, and we're presenting that pictorially with images. As you're turning the pages, you're kind of piecing together the thing he's doing, because it's like we always want the reader to know that this is a cinematic experience, that like, yes, it's a monologue. It's a long monologue about Monopoly and religion, but it's also visual. And that we have maybe it's our failure as writers, but we have trouble sometimes communicating that in the prose. It helps if we put the images down and then you can see like, oh, this is actually like a visual story that's being told. It's not just. So
just briefly to understand, did you have an artist draw it out, or were you just photoshopping images of different board games?
Yeah, just photoshopping.
Okay. Yep. I mean, I just want to commend you for that, because there are these people that go online when any format change is ever used in a screenplay and start these long arguments. I've never been a part of them. It's so much fun to not join in. You don't need to. There are other things to do with your life, and you prove that there's no one way to do it. As William Goldman said, nobody knows anything. And as long as you're presenting something that has flair and keeps the reader engaged, I think it's a win. And
that's exactly it. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's perfectly okay to do that. So I want to talk about a horror trope, because I was just kind of reading into it, because I was on a dog walk and I was like, you know what? They did that screenwriting trick where the first 10 pages is entertaining. You sympathize with these two girls, but before you're even sympathizing with them after the pantsing incident, which I thought was interesting, like they're talking about porn on a park bench, like the last thing you expect to Mormon missionaries, a bus stop bench, to be talking about. But in horror convention terms, it could be argued, we are in the spoiler section, it could be argued that since, as we later find out, Barnes is on birth control, and in one version of the ending, she is the person that you think dies, while Paxton is the person that you think lives, if you believe that version of the ending, because there's multiple interpretations available. And so were you going for that convention of the mention of sex or sex with young women as this forbidden thing that is repaid with horror, just going back to the classic 80s slashers that would do that, or going back to Hitchcock as well?
I think that's reaching one rung too far. I love what you're saying. It's a fascinating conversation. I think the main thing we were thinking is, one, it says a lot about these characters right away. When anyone talks about sex, how they talk about it says a lot about the characters, right? So the way two Mormon missionaries awkwardly, innocently navigate around a topic like sex is very telling and very interesting. The thing we were definitely intentionally trying to do, and this is where I wonder if your theory is amazing, and it works. What you're saying works, but what we were doing intentionally as writers was we were doing everything we could to tell you that Sister Barnes is the hero of the story. We're trying to tell you that she's the final girl. We're giving her the complicated past where she's questioning if she believes or doesn't believe. That makes you identify with her because most people who watch the movie are probably not Mormon. We're giving her edginess. We're pushing in on her face with the camera almost for for the first 40 minutes. We're just pushing in this is the girl. We're setting up an arc for her. She's mixed religious ideas and she could probably turn, so that meanwhile, Sister Paxton, who we're treating like Olaf and Frozen, we're treating like this bubbly, doofy side character. You should not be anticipating that she's the final girl. But once she's the final girl, in retrospect, it should make all the sense in the world that she actually has the bigger arc. She has, the audience's sympathy in a way that Sister Barnes doesn't. Fascinating. I love your slasher theory.
Well, I mean, it was an interesting way to start. And I had never really known about Mormons having religious underwear that, is called magic underwear, and that's brought up over and over. It becomes their code word, right? For when, for when to stab. And, the first time it's used, Barnes is killed because Paxton doesn't have a chance to stab him yet. The next time is at the end when, he says it, like he's making fun of her magic underwear. And, before we get to that scene, The Air I Breathe by the Hollies, Radiohead's Creep versus Lana Del Rey's Get Free, those are well-documented lawsuits that are settled. So there could have been a way for him to just talk about it without you hearing the music. And I would think that if you got the music rights from anyone, it would be the Hollies because they were triumphant in the case, and Radiohead probably wants to forget about it. And I don't remember hearing the song "Get Free" in the movie. So did you ever pursue those rights and not get them? Was that something that happened?
We did pursue Lana Del Rey. We never heard anything, and heard through music supervisors. She can be very difficult to get an answer from, and so
it didn't matter because when we first attempt a song for the end credits, it was Knocking on Heaven's Door. That's how we wanted to end the movie.
Makes sense.
Then we evolved. Then we tried Lana's song at the end credits, which worked. And then we got really excited about having the personal connection of Sophie Thatcher, who plays Sister Barnes, covering a song, any song. We were like, maybe she could cover Lana Del Rey's Get Free, but then we're like, but if you're gonna have a female voice cover that, you might as well be Lana. And then so putting Sophie on Knocking on Heaven's Door was amazing. So we kind of dropped the pursuit.
But it wasn't just doing the Knocking on Heaven's Door verbatim. It was doing it in the style of Massey Star's Fade Into You, which is well documented for cribbing from Bob Dylan's Knocking on Heaven's Door for the chord progression. And so we felt like there was something from a commentary standpoint about the idea of iterations and how things kind of ebb and flow.
And that was the thing. I got to admit, that was the thing where I was the one going I love this idea, but I just don't think anyone's going to get that. And I'm wrong. People have absolutely in a movie screening Q&As and so forth.
Great. I mean, I loved everything about it. I'm the biggest Radiohead fan, and I thought it was fantastic. Briefly, if you could give us a couple sentences, because I really want to get into Mr. Reed right now. But briefly, what would you tell us were your most surreal, high pressure moments of getting those Radiohead rights, or going down that avenue, or was it just the magic of Stacey Sher?
It was the magic of Stacey, her history of working with, Tarantino and the music rights alone on those, put her as a superhero. But even when you have that and the rights are being negotiated, they're having conversations, we're the type of guys that are on pins and needles and constantly checking in, are you sure we're good with the Hollies? Great. Are you sure we're good with Radiohead? Is Tom York responding to emails? It was scary, I think, for Radiohead from the standpoint that it is, even though the suits were settled, it's you're still putting that story out there.
Oh, no, I know, and they don't like it.
Come off the worst. I think Radiohead comes off the worst because not only did they lose the Hollies thing, but then they go after Lana Del And
Yeah.
I'm sure it wasn't them. Like, I'm sure it was some manager, lawyer. Like, who knows? I'm sure they had nothing to do with it, but it just doesn't sound cool.
How did you pick that iteration? The version that he's singing, which is the acoustic version of Creep? Like,
I think just the style of it. I think it just felt tonally more interesting. The pared down version of it also is that's an iteration of like the radio edit version that.
And it also felt more original too. We felt like we had maybe heard the other song more often.
Look, I think it's great that they did that. Like, kudos to Radiohead for letting that get out there. But also, since there was a lawsuit that was lost, you still had to pay for the rights. So it is like a benefit to them to be like, yes, you know what? We will license this song that is giving us a few headaches and we don't mind. So kudos to you on that. Ooh, hey, I'm jumping in really quick to remind you to check out Backstory Magazine. Folks, we turned 12 this year and we couldn't have done it without you. So look, we're a digital magazine. We're always updating our site with new articles. If you've never read us before, you could check us out on a desktop or laptop or via our iPad app, Backstory. You could even test drive us by reading our free issue in its entirety. And if you like what you see, and I hope that you do, you could use discount coupon code SAVE5 to become a subscriber and save $5 off a 1-year subscription. All you got to do is enter that code at backstory.net, and your login credentials will work at backstory.net and also in our iPad app as well. So it would really mean a lot to me to have you join us in supporting independent entertainment journalism. That's right. I'm talking to you, my podcast listeners in Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and my watchers of the Backstory Magazine YouTube page, which is where all these Zoomcasts can be found. That's right. You could watch us doing this interview as a Zoom on the Backstory Magazine YouTube page, but it would really mean a lot to me to have you support my passion project. So thanks for considering becoming a subscriber. But now let's jump right back into our interview with co-writers, co-directors Scott Beck and Bryan Woods about their latest film, Heretic, which is playing in theaters now. So I hope you'll get out there and see it and support excellent horror writing. So, all right, damn it. I've been waiting to ask this question since I saw the movie. This is getting into one of the things I love about it, which is that there is a branching aspect in which people could take things differently. But at the same time, I just want to start slowly on this. When you're writing like characters, one of the more important elements, I would think, are character goals. And so for Mr. Reed, I was doing the math in my head. And by the way, I'm terrible at math, but I was doing the math in my head of he is leading them down a road of iterations. He is showing that, yes, fast food has similarities. World religions, most importantly, have similarities. The music they listen to have similarities. Iterations is really important. And he's promising them at the end of their journey, this game he's playing with them that night, in his little game night, is going to, as he says, reveal the one true religion. Now, the only thing that he is not bringing up is the dark side, per se. Good old Satan, good old Mr. Scratch. And I thought that there was going to be a supernatural element. Which I was like, okay, so like the end of this movie, this brother's going to be like putting out some supernatural stuff, saying that he is Satan, Mr. Scratch, whatever you want to say, the dark one. And was there ever an iteration where there was anything supernatural or demonic about him? That's my first part of the question.
No, that's a great question. There's not. So we're really, this is what we're proud of. And it's also the thing that makes the movie extremely divisive. We thought it would be like the religious stuff that makes the movie divisive. It's actually this fact that I'm about to tell you right now, which is we are proud to be using a tool in our screenwriting toolbox that we have always wanted to use, but have never really been allowed to use. And that tool is anticlimax. Anticlimax is inherently disappointing, and that's why it's risky to whip out. But we felt that the exploration of religion and trying to find out the one true religion is often inherently anticlimactic. And so this kind of screenwriting tool of anticlimax manifests itself throughout the movie in many different forms. One of the forms is the character of Elder Kennedy, played by Topher Grace. We are building up this character to be a Scatman Crothers in The Shining or a Richard Farnsworth in Misery. We're building up this character who's either going to arrive at the house and he's either going to save the day or be killed by the villain. And we give you neither of those options. We give you a third anticlimactic option of he is actually just arriving to preach the good word. We like what that's saying about religion and the story, but understandably disappointing, right? And what you're describing about Reed, this journey of feeling like this drum roll that's happening over the course of the movie, that this is leading to Satan, this is leading to the devil himself, this is leading to some kind of demonic supernatural creature that's going to be in this chamber. That is exactly what we want you to feel and think. And then we want to disappoint you with Reed's boring truth that it is all about control. Our hope is that we are supplementing the movie with many other payoffs that you don't expect that are actually quite satisfying, the bike lock being one of them. So we're giving you things that we hope feel climactic and euphoric, but we are attempting to not give you the things that you're expecting as well.
Yeah, and I like that. And I mean, like, when I was leaving the theater, I was like, okay, if they didn't go for this version, which is essentially the version in your minds, would you agree is technically he is a serial killer who wants to prove himself correct about religion because he has supernatural power?
Yeah, I don't know if we call him a serial killer, but that's fair. You could call him.
I think the police would.
I mean, he's got multiple people downstairs in cages. Like, that's kind of the trope.
He's one part like a theological researcher. He's a skeptic. He's somebody that to us and to Hugh is still in pursuit of answering the unknowable, and that's what keeps him going. Like, I think there's not a sense that like, oh, he's definitively found the ultimate answer. I think the idea where he says religion is just a system of control is where his research has taken him. But there's also an exploration of like the psychology of human beings, the psychology of can I have Paxton Barnes do what I've planned? And we always talked about in the pre-production period of trading emails with Hugh that there probably are multiple ways that this night could have gone. Like, there's probably one version where Paxton Barnes, he spoke to and then he let them go. And there could have been a version where Paxton fought back earlier and then that would have changed the trajectory. But he would have been analytical in creating, we always called it like a decision tree, where if it started flowing this way, then there's a branch out of other possible outcomes that would have happened. We think he's a great observer of human psychology, of behavior. And one of the reasons he's done this to both Paxton Barnes and done it in prior nights is out of almost like a analytical research aspect, as insane as he is in going about it.
He's ultimately testing a hypothesis of can I use thoughts and ideas and control the evening? And
right. And the crack in his armor is when it's revealed that, you know, he thinks the device that he cuts out of Barnes's arm, which is a birth control device, hormonally regulates her cycle. Like, he thinks he's bringing it into, you know, the concept of simulacrum, you know, which is that we're living in a, you know, in the Matrix, basically. So it shows that he has failed in himself in his pursuits on a certain level because he doesn't even understand the concept of that. Look, I mean, like other branch, you talk about the decision tree and the concept of letting them go. Was it always the ending the way that we saw it? Because, you know, again, a Satan story and again, a horror movie or like just old mythology is the dark one makes people question their faith. Him showing them the Monopoly game and the songs and everything else. You're right. He could have let them go and it would have been a punishment that he would have been satisfied with, in which they decided, you know what, I don't want to be a missionary anymore, because that's what he was against. So was that always the ending, that the version that we see?
Yeah. I mean, I think like to us, it chases what is religion? Is religion seeing somebody resurrected from the dead? And even if somebody told you that happened, would you believe that? And this movie is very obviously asking that question of the audience. Like, do you believe what you see here with the resurrection of Barnes? Is there a scientific way to explain that? Is there a religious way to explain that?
And if
did it even happen?
And and if there's not, how does that affect your interpretation of the ending?
So for us, like the idea of there being a sacrifice of one of the characters, of Reed having to confront maybe one of the greatest fears that he has, which is death, and the way that he reacts to it in his final moments is revealing. All of these things, even though it's not beat out in like a specific outline from the get-go, they're kind of the discoveries that are made throughout the process of writing this, but then confirming and imbuing them with intentionality to make sure that it all feels like it's purposeful and not just kind of scattershot. So.
That makes sense. I mean, like again, when I was kind of thinking about the endings, would you say that is fair assessment for forgetting the branching element, but
Mhm.
these women that are being held captive are brought to a point where they are ready to literally commit suicide as part of the magic trick to bring in the next victims, in which they're down there harbored, caged at the end of their strings, and basically this is the only out that they're going to have. Would you say that's their path? Like if he was successful, and who says if he was or wasn't,
Mhm.
because that's another conversation we'll get to
Yeah.
in a second, but would they have been destined in a cage until he allows them to be the suicidal part of a magic trick?
I think it's the observations, especially in the research process of looking at something like Jonestown Massacre, having extended family members that actually were members in Jonestown that commit suicide. You start to see how somebody can be coerced, even if they're not knowingly coerced, into actually believing that suicide or following one's belief system that becomes your own leads you to staggering results. And so I think like that was coloring what we discovered.
In all fairness, Jonestown was a cult, and they were all there willingly. And in this iteration of your movie, these are captives that definitely wanted to
Mhm.
leave and were not allowed to.
Yeah,
So I mean,
what
like,
Reed might make the point. I mean, first of all, in our minds, different people that are captive, that he has captive, have different thoughts and feelings,
oh,
right?
okay,
Like
okay,
some want to
Yeah.
leave, some might want to be there. Reed might argue that they want to be there, or they want him to watch over them because he's basically put them in a state of physical and mental health that is. They're not really thinking with their with their minds. I also think you could argue, you could interpret the idea of them eating pie as they don't know that it's a poison pie, that he's tricking them. And I think it
but you would have
probably
thought that most of them would have experienced the prophecy reawakening. Oh, and they
necessarily,
just didn't
because
figure
you're
out.
making the assumption, I believe you're making the assumption that he has performed this exact miracle multiple times, but I would say not necessarily. That his experimentation, and even the people that are there, somebody was asking, like, are they all Mormon missionaries that are in the cages? We're like, I don't think any of they're probably none of them are Mormon missionaries.
Right,
Or
because he has to ask when somebody comes to the door, like, Where are you from?" Because
exactly.
I'm sure he signs up to get whoever will come to his door.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I'm curious about the usage of water. He literally answers the door in a rainstorm, holding a
Yeah.
Yeah.
watering bottle, and
Yeah.
there is the interesting device that you're using of the bucket filling, and
Mhm.
it's not even accusing you of a loud sound up, but it's something that jolts the audience a little when it fills up and dumps.
Right.
There's water damage, there's dripping. Water is used throughout the film, and ultimately in the cage room, there's a mister,
Mhm.
and he's still walking in there holding that
Yeah.
water.
Yeah.
What were you thinking about with water? And
I
even in
mean,
the end, like the snow is hardened water.
yeah. No, I mean, I think like the film theory student version of me is like, oh yeah, you can look into like the usage of water in holy texts, and is it a cleansing element that's perverted throughout like the subtext of this movie. But I think for us, like, there's also a very like literal use of it. It's torture, it's entrapment. You're stuck in a storm. All of a sudden, you're subjected to this dripping water in this library, and there's a tension that grows from that. There's an element of the mister in this caged room where it's kind of like water torture. Like, you're constantly wet and you're cold and you're freezing, but then you go outside in the final moments, and again, it feels like, is it cleansing? Is it speaking something to what was said earlier by the prophet about a blinding white light, and how does that connect to an interpretation of the movie?
They also all share the same kind of feeling that we're exploring, of like showing you something that's benign and innocent, and then as the story progresses it becomes ominous.
Mm-hmm.
Contextually, meaning like you see a watering can and it's like, oh, it's a little weird but no big deal. I mean, it's weird that he's holding it because it's raining, but whatever, it's a watering can, what a sweet old man. And then you realize the context of the watering can is that's how he feeds the people that he's entrapped. And that's a feeling of like, one of the inspirations for the story is Scott and I making a short film in Iowa, and we had to knock on a bunch of doors to ask permission to film in people's yards. And there was this amazing house at the white picket fence that we really wanted to film at. And so we knocked on the door of this house. Was this
15 years ago?
Yeah. Knocked on this house. This lovely couple answers. They're kind of older, and they're like, what are you doing? We're like, oh, well, we're shooting a movie and we wanted to ask permission. Oh, well, come on inside and like sit down with us. And like, all right, so we felt like missionaries, like we got to like sell ourselves and like get them to agree to let us film at their house. And we sit down and we're looking around the room. There's all these like trinkets of like glass menagerie, you know, animals, and they've got the TV on and they bring us tea and everything's very pleasant. And they're like, so tell us about this movie that you're shooting. And so we proceed to tell them about the short film that's about this man who's running to the love of his life as the world is ending and this asteroid is coming to blow up all life on Earth. And they sip their tea and they nod and they go, oh, interesting. Wow. Well, you know, the world is going to end, and that the asteroid, it's amazing that you're making a movie about this because the asteroid's coming for us in 2 months. It's going to come here and destroy all life on Earth. And all of a sudden we look at each other like, oh my God, like what have we stepped into? And like now all of a sudden everything that seemed innocent and normal takes on this kind of Lovecraftian, Kubrickian undertone. Like the animals, the statue of the dog in the corner of the room is now glaring at us. And the tea that we're sipping, we're like, is this poison? Like you have no idea. And so we were trying to capture that feeling throughout the movie, take these kind of innocent things and turn them ominous.
Did the statue in the hallway ever move? Because it looked like it moved for a second, but it could have been my eyes playing tricks.
There's maybe a little bit of shadow play in that to create the perception of movement. Yeah.
You know, was there ever a wife? Did a wife ever make?
Well, maybe. I mean, that's open to interpretation.
No. I mean, in one of your scripts, was there ever a character?
Was there ever a character of the wife
showing up and like he's met his perfect woman?
Yeah, maybe she did show up. Maybe she is in there.
Yeah,
on screen.
Did you write a version like 10 years ago that had the wife in it?
No, there wasn't like a wife character.
No,
came out.
It was always these three.
Yeah,
I got you. Yeah, no. Yeah.
Okay. You know, one thing to talk about, like that's a big one, is the ending and the branching effect. You know, obviously the Twilight Zone episode, The Occurrence on Owl Creek Bridge, famously has a man that's imagining this whole life in the last moments of his life as he's being hung. You could see that again in Jacob's Ladder when you're dealing with these near-death experiences. Obviously, the 2017 film The Discovery with Robert Redford, which was a Sundance movie that's on Netflix. Justin Later and Charlie McDowell, they co-wrote and directed it, and that's about like being in a simulation of sorts. Very complicated movie. Here, you could argue that at a few different points, the team loses, right? That even when she makes it down to the cage room, which he truly does want her to make it to, he then stabs her rather than she stabs him on the magic underwear line, and she just dies in there. You could also say that it's her fantasy that she's climbing around the house and Barnes is back alive with her final breath to save her, right? By killing him. And you could also talk about the crazy ass shot you guys have of her scurrying around the model when she is running around the house as being also a projected fantasy. And most importantly, the thing that Paxton said earlier is when she dies, she wants to come back to life and be a butterfly on somebody's fingers. They know it's specific. And she sees a butterfly on her finger. But in the opening scene, when they are definitely alive, because they're not killed the minute they walk in the door, there is a butterfly in the room. And it could be argued that butterfly got out with them in the vent. Yeah. What can you tell us about any of all that madness?
Absolutely nothing. We can tell you it's everything you're saying is very interesting. We can tell you that we engineered the movie to be a personal experience for people, and that our hope is that people watch the movie and have an interpretation of the final 20 minutes. And they may like that interpretation. They may not like that interpretation. They may see the movie a second or third time and change their interpretation. And they may argue and fight with their friends and family about what that interpretation is. And that is by design. And we hope that conversation happens. We think that religion, ultimately, belief versus not belief, is the question the movie's asking. And that is a very personal question, and it requires a personal answer that unfortunately Scott and I cannot provide.
Did you ever have a different ending? Forgetting about the ending where it's always this adventure and the audience.
It was always this ending. And I got to say, it was always this ending. And it took a lot of nerves to not change it, because there was definitely, like, we started screening the movie. Most studio movies go through kind of like a screening process, and then the audience goes like, they kind of rate their like satisfaction. Yeah. And A24, who've been like a pleasure to work with, gave us the confidence and courage to pursue our ending that is maybe not the most satisfying, but is true to the story we were telling and is true to our voice as artists. And we felt really grateful that they supported that, because I definitely feel in an alternate universe with the wrong kind of team, we could have, gotten scared at the 11th hour and went like, let's make the ending say this because that's what the audience wants to hear, or that would be more satisfying. And they gave us the courage.
Yeah, we had a fun anticipation of like the cinema score, like the anticipation of what was going to come out, because we were
score, meaning like the exit polls.
Yeah, the exit polls, because we were worried on like an A to F schedule that we were like, please don't get an A, please don't get a B, because we felt like if we did that, then it'd be confirming maybe one interpretation of the movie. And for us, again, going back to like the idea of using anticlimax, if you think the movie's going to go supernatural, no, it's not. And how does that interact with the idea of wanting to see something supernatural in the realm of like religious belief? And then nothing does happen. It was the same way with the ending, where we're like, it needs to be divisive. And it's been exciting to now like just sit back and more than anything on any movie that we've done, like be able to read certain interpretations or hear people that have seen the movie now 2 to 3 times and see how their evolving relationship comes, or hear people that hate the movie, but why do they hate it? What is it pushing against in terms of what the movie is offering or not offering, rather? So the interactive quality of it has been exciting, because I think that's, as filmmakers, that's more in the ballpark of where we want to go from here on out.
Well, last big question for you. What was your toughest scene? You're the writers, you're also the co-directors. What was the scene on the page? And it could be different for each of you, but what was the scene on the page that you were sweating and coming back to and rewriting over and over again? And what was the scene as a director where you were like, ooh, you know what? How are we going to get through this? And then something creatively just clicked for you. So starting on the page.
It might be the same for both of us, and it might be the same for both writing and directing. I have a feeling it's the Monopoly scene in the library was the most challenging. But you have to understand, when we think of things that are challenging and hard to do, that to me means like fun. Like that's exciting. And so it's tricky to like get it to work and get it to feel cinematic and make it clear so that people are understanding what we're saying, because it's very convoluted, and the clarity of storytelling was challenging on the page, and directing it and the performances. It was a lot of like, yes, Hugh is monologuing, but there's also a nonverbal conversation that's happening with the young women. They're telling a whole story on their faces that has to be engaging. So there were all those challenges to it, but it was challenging in a really fun way. And that is one of the reasons we connected with Hugh so strongly, is that this is an actor who has been challenging himself for the last 10 years, starting with Cloud Atlas, where he played multiple roles, which was just like such a bizarre in his career. And he did such a beautiful job. And then he does all these like brilliant little character turns in Guy Ritchie movies. He's playing an Oompa Loompa and Wonka. Like, this is an actor who is clearly excited by a challenge, and we really relate to that with him. Yeah.
Brian, was there a scene for you?
It is the Monopoly scene, but probably the scene when they first come in the house actually was deceptively difficult, because there's a tonality where you need to balance the normalcy of the situation, but then start increasing the tension, but not in a way that screams to the audience or to Paxton Barnes, get out right now. There needs to be these little moments to keep luring them in. And that meant that our directing antennas were constantly up about ways that we could enhance this. There was a degree of feeling that this is a 15-minute long scene. When we first sit down, we don't want to bore audiences either. And I feel like it was a week before we shot the scene, we were like, oh, what if the lights snap off at a very specific moment in the scene? And we engineered where that would land, where we felt like you're leaning into the conversation and all of a sudden you're spooked a little bit. And then we were like, oh, the lights can come back on. And now it feels like that was scary, but maybe we're back in normalcy, and try to toe the line and make sure that we weren't stepping on any sense of danger that would need to be accelerated later in the movie as well. So I think that living room scene was a little deceptively difficult, but I will say once we got that scene on its feet in like rehearsals, the back and forth between the 3 actors, we felt so comfortable about that aspect of it that really it was just like sitting back, overseeing the little technical qualities of what we needed to do to the scene, and then felt good. But the Monopoly scene definitely was the scariest thing.
Well, look, you guys have been so generous with your time. I love your film. I can't wait to see what you do next, including the definite sequel that we will see very soon for Heretic. I can't even imagine what that would be. No, but I can't wait to see what you do next. Scott, Brian, thanks so much for your time today.
Awesome. Appreciate it, Jeff. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. That was awesome.
And that's how the Q&A went down. Special thanks again to co-writer directors Scott Beck and Bryan Woods for being so generous with their time and coming down to chat about their latest film, Heretic, which is in theaters now, and I hope you go see so that you could support excellent horror writing. And folks, while you're surfing around online, I hope you also check out Backstory Magazine. We turned 12 this year, and we couldn't have done it without you, so I really hope that you will consider supporting independent entertainment journalism by becoming a subscriber. If you've never read us before, you could test drive us by reading our free issue, and if you like what you see, and I hope that you do, you could become a subscriber, and you could use discount coupon code SAVE5. That's SAVE and the number 5, and that will save you $5 off a 1-year subscription. As we're getting into the holiday season, you could even use that discount code to give a gift subscription to the important storyteller in your life, so keep that in mind as well. And all you got to do is enter the code at backstory.net in your checkout cart, and your login credentials for backstory.net will also work in our iPad app, Backstory, as well. So look, it would really mean a lot to me to have my podcast listeners and Apple Podcasts and Spotify and my YouTube watchers of the Backstory Magazine YouTube page, which is where you could see all these Zoomcasts take place. That's right, you could watch us in our Zooms. It would really mean a lot to me to have you join us as a subscriber, so thanks for considering. The Q&A with Jeff Goldsmith podcast is a copyright of Unlikely Films Incorporated in 2024. All rights reserved. And folks, if you want to get a hold of me, you could find me as Yo Goldsmith on Twitter or Backstory_mag on Twitter. You could also find me on Blue Sky as Yo Goldsmith or Backstory_mag. Same with Instagram, Yo Goldsmith or Backstory_mag. I even have a Facebook fan page, so you could drop in there, or you could write me a letter. That's right, via email to backstoryletters@gmail.com. And I will always do my darndest to reply. So thanks for reaching out. I'm Jeff Goldsmith, the publisher of Backstory Magazine and the host of the Q&A, thanking you for tuning in and telling you to stay out of trouble. Till next week.